Welcome to our webinar about the Nightlights app. Nightlights is a citizen science project where people go out and use our app to count up all of the different lights that they can see on the street. And so what we want to do today is to explain why it is that we're doing this. What's the science background behind the project and why is it so interesting to us? My name is Christopher Kyba. I'm a physicist and I work at the German Research Center for Geosciences in Potsdam and at the Ruhr University in Bochum. I've been studying artificial light in the outdoor environment for about 15 years.
My name is Loeka Jongejans and I'm a geoscientist, and I've been on this project since April, working at the Ruhr University of Bochum and the German Research Center for Geosciences in Potsdam. Before I was in polar research, but I have been interested in science communication and citizen science especially for a long time. And I'm also a hobby ornithologist, and I will explain to you later why this is relevant.
Before we get really into it, I want to start with what remote sensing is. Remote sensing is the art and science of getting information from light. And so this is an image from the Meteosat second generation satellite showing Europe and Northern Africa. And what you can see with your visual system in your brain is you can get information that, for example, Ireland and the UK are underneath a cloud. You can also see where areas are green. There must be something growing there. And you can see that the ocean and the sea are blue. So you're getting information from light about what is there. In remote sensing, we try to do the same sort of thing, but we can actually get a lot more information than just here is green, here is blue. We can get a lot of information about, for example, when trees lose their leaves and things like that. It's possible to do the same sort of thing at nighttime using a nighttime image. You see, this is taken several hours earlier when Ireland and the UK are still underneath that big cloud. And this was taken on a moonlit night, so you can see the reflection of moonlight off of the clouds and also the reflection of the moon in the Mediterranean. What you also see suddenly is where all the human settlements are, because we produce a great deal of artificial light that ends up, much of it going up into space. The satellite that we have that measures the whole world every night measures the radiance of light in a unit called a nanowatt per centimeter squared per steradian. And there's a little bit of a problem that for most of you watching this, and indeed actually for most physicists, you can understand what that unit means in principle without really having a feel for, is that a lot? Is that a little bit? And so what we wanted to do in our original Nachtlichter project was to translate this unit, nanowatts per centimeter squared per steradian, into something more understandable like lights per square kilometer. And that's what we did in the original project that ran from 2019 to 2022. Now, Nightlights or Nachtlichter is a smaller part of a bigger project called Nachtlichtbühne. Bühne stands for the Citizen Helmholtz Network for Research on Nighttime Light Phenomena. So what we did in this project is brought together a big team of citizen scientists, and we developed two different apps. One is about looking at fireballs. These are very bright shooting stars. And the other is our Nightlights app, looking at artificial light. There were 4 different organizations involved in producing the app, and we were funded by the German Helmholtz Association. In the original project, we were interested in these really, really big areas. So here you can see the map of this raster. It shows the individual pixels from that satellite where I showed you that image of Europe earlier. And what you see is that we filled them in completely with these individual streets where we counted all the lights. So all the streets that are marked yellow are places where we counted up all the lights. What you can see is that in this part of Dresden, we counted almost 6,000 lights, and each of the areas gets progressively larger until in the center of the city, we counted up in 5 satellite pixels about 20,000 lights. So by doing this, we can convert then from that radiance unit into lights per square kilometer. In total, we counted over 250,000 lights in almost 5,000 individual observations that were done by hundreds of individual people. This year, what we're doing is a little bit different. we have the same two projects on night lights and on fireballs, but we're doing an expansion on the project. And there's now a little bit slightly different constellation of research institutions that are involved. And this time it's funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research under the research year 2023, Our Universe. And so our topic this year is no longer what's the relation between the satellite data and what's on the ground, but rather we're trying to understand how do lights turn off late at night and what kind of lights turn off late at night. So our campaign is called Time for the Night. And to explain why we want to do this, I'll show this image of Manhattan. This is New York City in the early evening. It's a photograph taken by our colleagues at NYU. And then very early in the morning or very late at night, depending on how you think of it. And what you can see is that a lot of lights turned off as the night went on. And it's not just this architectural lighting you see here that turns off as the night goes on, but actually if you look at all of the windows in residential buildings, you'll see that despite the moniker, the city that never sleeps, actually in Manhattan, nearly everybody is sleeping at 2 or 3 in the morning. But you still have a lot of light that's there. That's important because the satellite that takes this imagery flies over the world at about 1:30 in the morning in local time. And that means that it's at a time when most people are in bed. And it's also a time when our citizen scientists are not running around in the streets counting lights. And so to help translate our results from the early part of the evening to this late part of the evening, we're interested in the project this year. So we can also see the way that lights decrease by looking upwards at the sky. And this we did in 2012 in Berlin. And what we saw that especially in the early evening before midnight, there was a really quite sharp decrease. Every hour the lights are dimming, and it's a little bit flatter later at night. But the other thing that we saw is that when we look in the blue spectral channel as opposed to the red spectral channel, we also see this decrease, but the decrease isn't as large. What that means is there must be a difference in which lights are turning off, like which lights are active in the early evening compared to which lights are active late at night, or which kind of lights are active at those times. And if you think about, well, why is there a lot of light at 1 or 2 in the morning? One of the places, if you do a Google search for highway lighting, what you'll see is that in almost all of these examples, there's not actually any cars on the road, right? So we very often leave lights on at times when there's no people around. And that's actually what the satellite is seeing. With that, I want to pass over to Loeka to explain how we're going to go about counting the lights.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So first, I would like to start with saying, why are we interested in the change and the use of lights? And why do we want to research it in the first place? So a lot of organisms, most of the organisms living on the Earth, are adapted to the day and night cycle, so light and dark. And so artificial light at night messes with a lot of those organisms. And for example, birds. And 1 out of 5 birds migrates, and most of them do that at night. And that means that light at night distracts them and takes them off their course. And here's an example of New York City, where on ground zero there's a light monument where 2 big light columns are shining up in the air that can be seen from about 100 kilometers away. And a lot of birds have gathered in these light columns. So birds from all around from the wide surroundings that are flying to the south at this time of the year are distracted, fly into the cities where they collide, and they can fly into buildings and die. This is, of course, an extreme example, but alone in Germany, every year, 100 billion of birds die because of collision with glass windows. In a German study this year, they monitored the post tower in Bonn during almost 200 nights. And as you can see on the picture on the left, in the early evening, this post tower is brightly lit. And on the right, in the late evening or at night, there is only a few lights, but still there's dim lights all night long in this tower. And during these 200 nights that they monitored, they found almost 1,000 birds dead or injured So these are a lot of casualties of birds flying against buildings because of light. The Fatal Light Awareness Program Canada makes out these layouts every year of all the birds that they collected. And that is, of course, a very sad picture. Another effect artificial light at night has is on insects. And as we all know, that insects gather around lamps. And with that, they lose energy for mating, foraging, pollinating our crops. So that has also an effect on our agriculture. And here in this example in the USA, there is so many mayflies gathering around this bridge that it's actually dangerous for cars. Also on plants and crops, light has a direct effect. So here you can see a street lamp on a pole shining in the direction of the road, but still around the lamp there's a lot of light. So the closest to the lamp, all the plants are still green. The further out you go, the plants have turned yellow or even brown. And now you might think, well, green is good, no? But actually these plants in this time of the year are supposed to make seeds, and by that they turn brown, and they are not doing this or later in the year. And these are only a few examples of the many effects that artificial light at night has on the environment. Then there's also the aspect of energy. We spent globally 100 billions of euros on the maintenance, the installation, and energy costs of lights. And it was estimated that lighting makes up about 3% of the global power consumption. So this is a lot. Global light emissions are increasing every year, and we don't really understand why that is. Are there just more lights, or are they brighter lights? What kind of lights are these, and when are they turned on? This is what we want to find out in our project, and this is why we invite you to count lights with us. And we distinguish thereby for different types of lights. So we look at, for example, street lights and traffic lights, shop windows, private windows, lit facades, orientation lights, lit signs, and decorative lights. And if you want to participate, you have to complete this online tutorial that you can find on our website. And here you will learn all about these kinds of lights that you need to know to participate and how to count them. And then you go out on the street and count lights. And this you do with the Nightlights app. It's really easy to use. And you pick a street, and then you walk down the street while putting in more lights that you see on the street that are on. For that, you have to select where you want to count. So you can either do this by selecting a already defined transect or by creating one yourself. And the transect runs mostly from street corner to the next. As you can see in the picture on the right, a street can be made up from multiple transects. And then you can pick the street transect you want to count and count all the lights that are on that transect at that moment. As Chris mentioned, we are mostly interested in seeing the change of light use during the course of the evening and the night. Therefore, we would like to ask you to survey streets multiple times. So at least 2 times per street with 1 hour at least in between. And now I hand back the microphone back to Chris so that he can tell you more about the data analysis.
Thanks, Loeka. So now I'm going to show you an example of what it will look like when you're on the street and also how we're going to analyze your data. This is a photograph I took in Potsdam in the early evening. And here's a photograph of the same street several hours later. And at first glance, it seems like everything is the same. It's just that the people disappeared. But you can see changes, for example, in these 3 shop windows. In the late evening, 2 of them are turned off, but in the early evening, all 3 of them were on. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to look for. So again, showing it on the street, here's an example where you see that all of these shop windows are turned off and the sign is turned off late at night, a little bit after midnight. And here you see this reflection in the glass. That's because across the street, there's another shop that has the lights on and the sign on. So we really want to understand what fraction of shops in Germany and around the world are turning their lights off and at what time. So here's now how we're going to analyze the data. We have a model for how lights turn off during the night, in which, as time goes on in this direction, the number of lights on any given street decreases and then goes flat, and the lights just stay on for the rest of the night. This is called a logistic model for the people who are interested in the actual curve, and I'm going to show you now how we fit it to your data. So if you imagine that you made two observations here shown with a star at a certain time and you had a certain number of lights, we can draw a logistic curve that goes through those 2 points. Now that's great, but the problem is that I can draw another logistic curve which also goes through those 2 points. And so this is why I want to show why it's really great. While 2 observations are the minimum that we need for you, because we don't know anything about how lights are changing if we only have 1 observation, it's actually helpful if you do more than 2, because I can draw all sorts of logistic curves that go through these 2 points. But if I add a 3rd observation, now I'm really starting to constrain things. You can see that all those curves marked red, they don't agree very well with the data that you took. Now, the way that the analysis works, the way we take your data and connect it to everybody else's, is what I want to explain next. What I'm showing here is simulated data. These are not real counts of people on the streets. Instead, it's a computer simulation of people walking down the street and counting up lights. And the blue curve is what we're putting in as the input in this case. So we're saying that a great deal of lights turn off throughout the night. More than 80% of all the lights turn off. And the switch happens sometime around about 9 o'clock as the center of the turnoff. And your 2 observations are these 2 stars, and all the red dots are the observations of all the other participants. And so what our fit tries to do is to find the logistic curve that does the best job of fitting all these points. And so what will always happen is that one of your observations will be below that curve and one will be above, if you're not sitting both of them perfectly on the curve. And what I want to show now is if I do a different input function, for example, for a different type of light or a different country, what I see is that my fit is different. The orange line has changed in terms of where it is. You might also notice that the blue and the orange lines don't agree with each other particularly well. And the reason for that is that we don't have yet very much data. Not every street turns the lights off in exactly the same way, and they don't do it in the same way every single night. And once in a while, people also make mistakes by counting. All of that is okay, because as we add up more and more data, what you see is that the orange curve gets closer and closer to the blue curve. So what we really need is to get as many people to take part as possible, and to also have hopefully not just 2 observations on streets, but sometimes 3, and also as many streets as you can. So one night do the street closest to your house. On another night, do another street that's a little bit further away from your house. So that's how we're going to analyze the data, and we're inviting you to take part in September and October this year. So Loeka, you can take us to the end.
Yeah, we invite you all to join us. You can participate in Germany and worldwide. You can participate by yourself by just doing the tutorial, downloading the app, and going out on the street and counting lights. You can also join a larger counting campaign. And if you would like to help us with analyzing the data or with running and organizing a local campaign, please contact us. And we hope you will all participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.